In a world where money, debt and war are the foundations of this society, one man's knowledge, teachings and concepts have made certain government departments extremely fearful of him. Our guest Winston Shrout has been developing his knowledge of commerce for many years. Those who are able to achieve this high level of knowledge are very few. Once you begin to research, you actually realise this is modern day alchemy.
Winston, just to kind of bring us into this, how did you get into commercial redemption and commerce as a whole?
It had to do with an interest. Believe it or not, my interest was actually in scripture and theology.
Right.
And I had been a student of that for all of my life. And then as I came later on in my life, I had an opportunity to come upon this information, and then I saw such a close parallel of commerce to scriptural truth, although it's not the same thing. It's a very, very close parallel, and then I started to study the mirror and found out that commerce was a mirror of truth. And so it was very, at that point, it became very, very simple to understand the concepts of commerce, you see. Now, actually, the phrase that's used is commercial redemption, and that phrase was coined as a result of the effort of a man, and I'll leave his name out. He doesn't like public exposure. But anyway, during the 1980s in the United States, in the Midwest, there was a great problem with the bankers foreclosing on the farms.
So farms were basically being put out of business because banks were refusing to extend them credit.
Not so much extending credit, they had already extended the credit.
And then they were calling in the debts.
They were foreclosing. And so the man in the Midwest had actually started out trying to develop methods to save the farms because he knew the value of food. And so he was trying to save those situations when he started to develop the technology. Actually, he had a great deal of training in banking. His grandfather owned a couple of banks, and his father was involved intimately with the government in funding and different things that pertain to the farming industry. And so he had a great deal of knowledge of the inner workings of the bank. And so he set about to develop a process to prevent the loss of the banks, and eventually the term commercial redemption had to do with his knowledge of commerce and how to apply it to save the farms. And so that's what his initial thrust was. And then over a period of time, there were a few men around him who understood commerce, accounting, and all those things very well. And so they started to look at the remedies that were available in our present situation. The United States and all of the, as I coined the term, all of the civilized nations are involved in bankruptcy under the admiralty for jurisdiction. And so he started to look closely at that and look at the remedies that would be possible to prevent the banks from foreclosing the farms. So that's how it all started.
So we have an initial problem of foreclosure and a commercial remedy to prevent the foreclosure.
That was the thrust of it. If you look closely at the word foreclosure,
yes,
that means that the contract was already closed. And so what we're really looking at is what would be better termed breach of contract or breach of mortgage. You understand what's happening when they say foreclosure? That's an illusion. The thing was already foreclosed. It was closed the moment that the note was tendered. And so what's happening is that the banks were actually trying to they were trying to say the farmer was in breach, but as you know, in the mirror, things are not as they appear. And so actually, technically, it was the bank that was in breach of mortgage contract, and the biggest problem that was causing that, or the thing that was causing the illusion, was the fact that the banks were doing off-balance sheet ledgering, which has now caught up with them, with global banking coming in now and demanding that they bring all of those balance sheets back on ledger. You understand that in the accounting that we do under bankruptcy, it's all double entry bookkeeping, and we have an account payable side and we have an account receivable side. On the account payable side, the maker of the note is the creditor and the bank is the debtor, but on the account receivable side, the maker is the debtor and the bank is the creditor. But if you combine those two sides of the accounting together, you come out with a zero balance, demonstrating that the contract was in fact foreclosed. So what has happened is the banks have taken the account payable side off ledger, leaving the account receivable side showing that the maker of the note is actually the debtor. So what's happening now in the banking world, there's a big move, Basel III agreements. That's what they're doing. They're bringing
Basel
it back.
II.
Say again?
Basel II.
Actually, it's got to 3 now.
It's got to 3 now.
Yeah. They're instituting that now.
Oh, right.
And
this is something that's not being talked about very much.
No, not very much. But those things were necessary because the commercial banks, and I use that term loosely because they're not really a bank. They're really a debt servicer. That's all they are. And so the debt servicers / banks and so forth have been hiding the fact that the maker of the note was actually the creditor of the whole thing. And so the accounts receivable turns into a security, and they're trying to collect on that. So you have to look in the mirror when you start to talk about.
Hello.
Sure.
Yeah.
Whatever you're doing, you can't be doing unless you've got vision.